The nurse told me my blood pressure spiked 20 minutes before I was fully awake from the anesthesia, and it wasn't the surgery. It was my daughter, Denise, standing at the foot of my hospital bed with her phone turned toward me, telling me that at that exact moment, while I was still counting backward from 10 in an operating room, my oldest son was sitting in a lawyer's office with the power of attorney I signed 8 years ago, trying to talk about how everything I own was going to be split up. I want you to understand the shape of that sentence before I go any further, because it took me a full minute, lying flat with an IV in my arm and a new hip held together with titanium, to understand it myself. Bradley wasn't visiting me. Bradley wasn't in the waiting room. Bradley had driven 40 minutes to Marilyn Voss's office on Chestnut Street with a document meant to let him make decisions about my heart and my lungs, and he was using it to try to get a head start on decisions about my house, my accounts, and everything Carol and I built over 44 years of marriage. I'm 67 years old. I spent 34 years as a building inspector for Larkin County, which means I have spent my whole working life reading documents for the gap between what a form says and what a person is actually trying to get away with. I've caught contractors trying to pass off a load-bearing wall as decorative. I've caught landlords who backdated inspection stickers. I know what it looks like when somebody tries to use one piece of paper to do the job of a different piece of paper. And lying in that hospital bed, still groggy, still cold from the operating room, I recognized exactly what my son was doing, because I'd spent 34 years watching people do smaller versions of it. This is the story of how my own children almost split up my life while I was still breathing, and how the habit I built inspecting other people's houses turned out to be the same habit that saved my own. My name is Roger Halloway. I grew up 2 towns over from where I live now, the son of a machinist who believed a man's word was worth exactly as much as the paperwork behind it, and not 1 cent more. My father used to say a handshake gets you into a room, but a signature is what gets you out of a lawsuit, and I carried that into every day of my career. I started with Larkin County as a junior inspector at 23, the year after I married Carol, and I retired as the senior building inspector for the whole county 34 years later, at 59. I still do consulting work now and then, mostly for contractors who want a second set of eyes before they submit plans, mostly because sitting still all day makes my knees hurt worse than standing up does. Here's the thing about inspecting buildings for that long. You stop trusting verbal assurances almost entirely, and you start trusting dates, signatures, permit numbers, and code sections instead. Every inspection I ever did in 34 years, I logged by hand first and typed up second, with the date, the address, the specific code section, and my own signature. Because a verbal "it's fine" doesn't hold up when a roof collapses 2 winters later, and somebody's lawyer wants to know exactly who looked at exactly what. I'll give you one example, because it explains more about how my mind works than any amount of me describing it directly. In my 22nd year on the job, a contractor named Delbert Kowalczyk tried to convince me that a second-floor addition on Maple Court had adequate header support over a new bay window, and he told me, standing right there on the ladder next to me, that the original architect had verbally approved a smaller beam to save cost. I asked him for the architect's name and number. He didn't have it. I asked him for anything in writing. He didn't have that either. I failed the inspection on the spot, wrote up the code section from memory, and told him to come back with either the correct beam or a stamped engineering letter. He came back with the correct beam 2 weeks later, furious the whole time. And 11 years after that, I read in the paper that the house 2 doors down, built by a different contractor who hadn't been inspected as carefully, had its bay window collapse in a heavy snow. Nobody was hurt, but I've never forgotten how close he told me it was fine came to being the only thing standing between a family and a room full of snow. A verbal assurance is worth exactly as much as the person willing to put it in writing, and not 1 cent more. I bring that story up now, before anything else, because it's the same instinct that saved me 34 years later. Except that time, the beam wasn't holding up a bay window. It was holding up my own family. I brought that habit home with me. Carol used to tease me about it constantly. Our marriage certificate is filed in a fireproof box, along with the deed to this house, the title to both cars, every insurance policy we've ever carried, and a running ledger, in my own handwriting, going back to 1981, of every major repair, every appliance purchase, and every loan we ever paid off. Carol calls it my inspection habit turned inward. I call it the only apology I know how to give a family for spending so many years working long hours away from them. I make sure nothing about our life together is ever a mystery when I'm not in the room to explain it. Carol and I have 3 children. Bradley is 35, the oldest, and he has spent his whole adult life positioning himself as the responsible one, the one who handles things, the one who calls the insurance company and negotiates with the cable provider and reads the fine print so the rest of us don't have to. For a long time, I was grateful for that. I want to say that clearly before I tell you what he did, because Bradley is not a cartoon villain in this story. He is a man who genuinely believes he is protecting this family, and that belief is exactly what made him dangerous. Denise is 32, and she has spent her whole adult life being the one who notices things a beat before anyone else does. She's a charge nurse on the orthopedic recovery floor at Ridgeview Medical Center, which, as it turns out, mattered more to this story than any of us could have guessed the week it happened. Denise doesn't talk much at family dinners. She watches, and then she says one sentence that changes the whole conversation. Corey is 29, the youngest, and for most of his adult life, he has stayed out of every family disagreement on principle. He works as a mechanical drafter for a company 2 states away. He calls on Sundays, he comes home for Christmas, and until the week I'm about to describe, he had never once taken a side in anything involving Bradley, Denise, and me. I want to tell you where those 3 roles actually came from, because none of this happened in a vacuum, and I think it matters for understanding why what Bradley did hurt as much as it did, instead of just making me angry. Bradley was 19 when my own mother, his grandmother, had a stroke that left her unable to speak clearly for the last 4 years of her life. He was the one who drove 2 hours every other weekend to sit with her, the one who learned to read her hand signals before any of the rest of us did, the one who argued with her insurance company on the phone for 40 minutes at a time when the rest of us would have given up after 10. He was good at it. He was young, and he stepped into a role most 19-year-olds never have to consider, and he never once complained about it in front of me. I used to tell people at work, with real pride, that my oldest son had more patience for hard paperwork than most grown men I'd trained on the job. Denise was 12 when that same stroke happened, too young to help with insurance calls, but I remember her sitting on the floor of my mother's hospital room reading picture books out loud, slowly watching my mother's eyes to see which pages she reacted to, long after the rest of us had run out of things to say. She's had that same watchfulness her whole life. It's why she became a nurse, and it's why, 32 years later, she was the one who noticed something wrong in Bradley's voice 3 weeks before anyone else did. Corey was 9, and Carol and I made a decision back then, right or wrong, to keep him mostly away from the hospital visits because he'd had a rough year already with a bullying situation at school, and we didn't think he could carry both things at once. He grew up in a house where 2 of his siblings quietly absorbed a family crisis, and one of them, him, was handed a version of the story with the hardest parts already sanded down. I think that's part of why, as an adult, his instinct is always to smooth things over first and ask questions later. Nobody ever showed him a different way to handle a hard family moment because we made that choice for him when he was 9, without ever explaining it. I'm telling you all of this because when Bradley stood in that conference room years later, holding a document that wasn't his to use the way he used it, he wasn't inventing a role from nothing. He was doing, badly and dishonestly, an exaggerated version of the one job this family had quietly handed him half his life ago. Handle the hard thing so nobody else has to. The tragedy of it, if I can call it that without excusing him, is that the same instinct that made him a good grandson at 19 made him a man capable of lying to his own wife and siblings at 35. Because nobody had ever told him there was a difference between carrying weight for people and deciding things for them. I want to take you back 8 years, because the document Bradley walked into that lawyer's office with didn't come from nowhere, and understanding exactly what it was meant to do and what it was never meant to do is the whole spine of this story. Carol had what the doctors called a transient ischemic attack on a Wednesday morning, a small stroke that resolved within hours, but scared both of us badly enough that we drove straight from the emergency room to Marilyn Voss's office 3 days later. I remember sitting in Marilyn's waiting room holding Carol's hand, both of us still rattled, and Marilyn coming out herself instead of sending her assistant, because she'd known us long enough by then to skip the formalities. "I want you both to sign healthcare powers of attorney for each other today," she told us, "and I want you to think seriously about backup agents for your children, in case you're ever both incapacitated at the same time, and someone needs to make a fast decision at a hospital." Carol asked her, plainly, what exactly that document would let a backup agent do. Marilyn answered just as plainly, "Only medical decisions, whether to authorize a procedure, whether to withdraw treatment, who the doctors talk to in the room. Nothing about money. Nothing about property. If you ever want someone to have authority over your finances, that's an entirely separate document. And I'd want a much longer conversation before either of you signed one of those." I named Bradley as my backup healthcare agent that afternoon. He lived 12 minutes from the hospital. Denise's shifts made her hard to reach fast during the day, and Corey was 2 states away. It wasn't a vote of confidence about money. It was a decision about who could physically get to a hospital bed the quickest. And at the time, that was the entire reason. And I said as much to all 3 of my children over dinner that same week, so nobody would ever wonder about it later. Nobody wondered about it for 8 years. Until the week I scheduled a hip replacement. I'd needed the surgery for almost 2 years. My right hip had worn down from decades of climbing ladders and crawling through crawl spaces on inspections. And by the time I finally scheduled the operation, I could barely make it up my own porch steps without stopping. My orthopedic surgeon, a calm, unhurried man named Dr. Okonkwo, described it to me in the plainest terms he had. A routine procedure, low risk for a man my age and otherwise good health, 1 to 2 nights in the hospital, walking with a cane within days. Bradley did not treat it that way. From the moment I told the family the surgery was scheduled, he started talking about it in a different register than everyone else. At Sunday dinner 3 weeks before the surgery, while Carol was passing the potatoes, he said out of nowhere, "You know, at Dad's age, even routine surgery carries real risk. We should be prepared for anything." "Bradley," Carol said, setting the bowl down harder than she needed to. The doctor used the word routine 4 times in one appointment. "I'm just saying we should be realistic," Bradley said, and reached for his water glass instead of looking at either of us. Denise caught my eye across the table. She didn't say anything in front of everyone, but 2 days later, in the kitchen, while Carol was outside watering the tomatoes, she brought it up again. "Dad, Bradley keeps talking about your surgery like it's a coin flip. I checked your chart myself. Elective hip replacement, healthy patient, low complication risk. He's not getting that from any doctor. He's getting that from somewhere else." I told her I thought Bradley was just being Bradley, worrying out loud the way he always had. I want to be honest about how wrong I was to leave it there. 3 weeks before the surgery, something happened that I didn't tell Denise or Corey about right away, because I genuinely didn't know yet what to make of it, and because some part of me wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Bradley came by the house on a Thursday evening with a manila folder and set it on the kitchen table without asking if I had time to sit down. "It's called a transfer on death deed," he said, sliding a pen across to me before I'd even opened the folder. It lets the house pass straight to whoever's named, skips probate entirely, saves the estate thousands in legal fees. I already ran it by Denise and Corey. Everybody's fine with it. I just need your signature and we're done. I opened the folder and read it the way I've read every document put in front of me for 34 years. Slowly, from the top, out loud in my own head. I got to the beneficiary line before I said anything. "Bradley, this only names you." "That's just how the form works," he said too quickly. "It's easier administratively to have one name on it. And then I handle splitting things fairly with Denise and Corey afterward, so nobody has to deal with 3 names on a county filing." I've read a lot of deeds in 34 years. What Bradley was describing was not what the document in front of me actually said, and both of us in that kitchen knew the difference between "the form works that way" and "I decided to fill it out that way." I told him I wanted to think about it, which is something I almost never say. Bradley's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It tightened, just for a second, the way a man's face tightens when a plan he thought was already finished suddenly isn't. Then he smiled and said, "Sure, no rush, Dad," and left the folder on the table when he left. I called Denise that same night at 9:40 and asked her, as plainly as I could, whether she and Corey had discussed a transfer on death deed for the house with Bradley. There was a silence on the line long enough that I knew the answer before she said a word. "Dad, I have no idea what you're talking about," she said. "Nobody has talked to me about any deed." I called Corey the next morning. Same question, same silence, same answer. Neither of my other 2 children had ever heard the phrase "transfer on death deed" until I said it to them over the phone that week. I didn't sign the folder Bradley left on my kitchen table. I put it in the drawer where I keep things I haven't decided about yet. And 2 days later, I drove to Marilyn Voss's office without telling anyone, including Carol, because I wanted to hear a professional explain exactly what that document would have done if I had signed it. Marilyn read the deed, set it down on her desk, and asked me a question I have not stopped thinking about since. "Roger, did Bradley tell you this deed named all 3 of your children? Or just him?" "Just him," I said. "He told me you 3 had already talked about it." Marilyn is too careful a lawyer to say anything unprofessional about a client's son. What she said instead was, "This document, if signed, would have removed Denise and Corey's interest in the house entirely and given it to Bradley alone, effective on your death, outside of anything your current will says. I want to be very clear, this isn't a mistake in the drafting. Someone filled this out correctly to do exactly what it does." I asked Marilyn to draw up an updated will, one that spelled out, in plain language, exactly how I wanted the house, and everything else divided among my 3 children equally, with a specific clause naming Denise as the person authorized to make financial decisions if I were ever incapacitated, since she was the one who'd noticed something was wrong before I had. I signed that will in Marilyn's office 19 days before my surgery, with Renata Suarez, her paralegal, serving as the notary and second witness. I want to describe something small that happened during that signing, because it turned out to matter more than anything else in this story. Renata keeps the office's appointment calendar herself, on paper, in a bound register that sits at the front desk, because Marilyn doesn't trust anything digital for scheduling. When I called to book that appointment, 19 days before my surgery, I called from my own kitchen phone, gave my own name, and asked for the earliest opening. Renata wrote it down in her own handwriting. Roger Halloway. Will update. Personal request. Tuesday, 11 a.m. I didn't think about that register again for 3 weeks. Neither did Bradley, because Bradley never knew it existed. I told Carol what had happened with the deed 2 days after I signed the new will. Once I'd had time to sit with it and decide how to say it without sounding like I was declaring war on our son. She listened without interrupting, the way she always does. And when I finished, she said, "Roger, I think our son is scared of something, and I don't think it's money." "What do you mean?" "I think he's scared that if you don't come back from this surgery exactly the way you went into it, he's going to lose the version of you he's spent his whole life trying to manage," she said. Bradley doesn't handle uncertainty by sitting still. He handles it by grabbing the nearest piece of paper and trying to make the future smaller and safer, even if it means going around the people he loves to do it. I didn't disagree with her. I still don't. But understanding why a man does something wrong has never once, in my experience, made it stop being wrong. I want to back up now and walk you through how we got here, because a transfer on death deed doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's the last step of a much longer staircase, and I didn't see the staircase clearly myself until I started laying the steps out in order, the same way I used to lay out a timeline of code violations for a hearing. 6 years ago, Bradley sat at this table with the county tax bill in his hand and said, "Dad, let me just pay this online for you. Their portal's a mess, and I've got the account number memorized anyway from doing my own." It was a genuine kindness at the time. The county's payment system really was clunky back then, and I really did dislike using it. I gave him the account information for that one purpose, and for 6 years, that's all it was ever used for. 5 years ago, I forgot to transfer money before an automatic payment came out, and the checking account came up short by $40 for 2 days before I caught it. Bradley heard about it at dinner and said, "Let me get added as a signer on the joint account, just for emergencies, so somebody local can fix it fast if something bounces, and you two are asleep or out of town." Carol was hesitant. "Roger, that feels like a bigger step than a tax bill," she said to me privately that night. I overruled her, gently, because it seemed practical, and because I genuinely didn't want to burden Denise or Corey, who lived farther away or worked less flexible hours, with something that small. 3 years ago, Bradley took over renewing our homeowner's insurance and our utility accounts, consolidating the renewal notices to his own email address, so nothing falls through the cracks while you two are traveling. That was the year Carol and I started taking a spring trip together, our first real vacation since I retired, and I remember being genuinely thankful someone was minding those details while we were gone. I didn't ask myself at the time why a man managing his own household and 2 young kids of his own had time to manage ours too. I just said, "Thank you." 8 months ago, Bradley sat across from me at this same kitchen table and said, "I want to talk to you about refinancing the house. There's a rental property 2 streets over from mine. Good bones. My business partner's already looked at it. And pulling some equity out now, while rates are still workable, could set the whole family up." I said no. It's one of the only times in this whole staircase that I said no clearly and directly, and I remember Bradley's response wasn't anger. It was a kind of quiet recalculation. The look of a man crossing one plan off a list and already starting on the next one before he'd finished nodding at me. I didn't connect those 4 things into a pattern until Marilyn asked me to, sitting in her office with the deed on her desk between us. "Roger," she said, "each one of these, taken by itself, sounds like a helpful son. Taken together, it's a 5-year project to become the only person who understands your finances well enough to speak for them. The deed wasn't an isolated bad decision. It was the next scheduled step." She asked me to do something that afternoon that I found harder than I expected. Pull the actual account statements, the ones Bradley had been managing for years, and look at them line by line, the way I would have looked at a contractor's invoice. I did it that same week, sitting at my kitchen table with 6 years of statements spread out in front of me, and I found nothing criminal. I want to be honest about that, because it would be a different story if I had. No missing money, no forged signatures. What I found instead was smaller, and in some ways more unsettling. Dozens of small decisions Bradley had made on our behalf that he'd never once mentioned to me. A change in our homeowner's insurance deductible 2 years back that saved $11 a month. but would have cost us $4,000 more out of pocket in a real claim. A utility account switched to a payment plan I'd never approved because it earned some kind of referral credit for the person who signed us up. A tax payment made 3 days before a deadline instead of 3 weeks before. The way I'd always done it myself, cutting the margin for error down to almost nothing without ever telling me he'd done it. None of it was theft. All of it was Bradley quietly deciding over and over that his judgment about our life didn't need to be checked against mine first. I sat with those statements until almost midnight, and when Carol found me still at the table, she asked what I was looking for. "I'm not sure anymore," I told her. "I think I'm looking for the exact day I stopped being the one who decided things about my own house." I never found that exact day. I don't think there was one. That's the part Marilyn was right about. It wasn't a single decision. It was 6 years of small, reasonable-sounding steps, each one just large enough that saying no would have felt petty, until the 6th step turned out to be a deed that would have handed him the house. I want to tell you about the scene with Denise that happened around the same time, because it's the moment the pattern stopped being something only I noticed. About 2 weeks before the surgery, Denise came by the house on a Saturday afternoon to help Carol in the garden, and she found the folder with the transfer on death deed still sitting in the kitchen drawer because I'd shown it to Carol and forgotten to put it away properly. Denise read it standing at the counter, and I watched her face go through the same thing mine had gone through in Marilyn's office, confusion sliding into something colder. "Dad, this only has Bradley's name on it," she said. I told her I knew, and that I hadn't signed it, and that I'd already updated my will with Marilyn instead. Denise set the folder down very deliberately, the way she sets down a chart when she's about to say something to a doctor she disagrees with. "I need you to understand that I'm not upset, because I want half a house I haven't earned any more claim to than Bradley has. I'm upset because he told you Corey and I already agreed to something we never heard about. That's not a financial mistake, Dad. That's a lie about 2 specific people to get one specific thing." She called Corey that same night, without asking me first, and told him everything. Corey's first response, almost reflexively, was to try to talk her down. "Maybe it's a miscommunication," he told her, according to what Denise told me afterward. "Bradley probably just meant to loop us in and forgot." Denise pushed back hard enough that by the end of the call, Corey agreed to at least hear it from me directly, which he did 2 days later on a Sunday evening. Corey has never been a confrontational person, and that phone call was the most direct thing I'd heard from him in years. "Dad, I don't want to believe Bradley would do that on purpose," he said. "But I also don't want to be the guy who stays neutral just because staying neutral is easier, and something happens because I didn't say anything when I could have." I told him he didn't need to pick a side yet, that nothing had actually happened, that I hadn't signed anything, and that my new will was already handled. I believed that when I said it. I did not yet know that Bradley was about to try again, in a much bigger room, using a much bigger document, while I was unconscious on an operating table. 10 days before the surgery, at what turned out to be the last full family dinner, before everything came apart and slowly came back together, Bradley raised a toast that I still think about. He held up his glass and said, "To Dad's surgery going smooth, and to all of us being ready for whatever comes after, no matter what." Everyone clinked glasses. Only Denise and I, across the table from each other, understood that ready for whatever comes after wasn't a wish. It was a warning he didn't know he was giving. I want to tell you about one more conversation before the surgery, because it's the one that told me Bradley had stopped hiding what he was doing and started, in his own mind, treating it as already decided. A week before the operation, Kimberly called Denise on her own, without Bradley knowing, and asked her a question that Denise didn't fully understand the weight of until much later. "Has your dad said anything to you about a family meeting after the surgery?" Kimberly asked. "Bradley's been talking about it like it's already scheduled. He mentioned it to my mother at dinner last week. Something about handling the estate conversation while everyone's already gathered for the recovery. Denise told her honestly that no such meeting existed, that she had no idea what Kimberly was talking about. And Kimberly went quiet on the phone for a moment before saying, "That's what I was afraid of. He talks about some things like they've already happened before they actually have. I thought maybe this time it was real because he sounded so sure." Denise told me about that call 2 days later, sitting on my back porch while I iced my hip before the surgery. And it was the first time either of us used the word pattern out loud instead of just circling around it. "Dad, I don't think this is a one-time thing he's doing because he's scared about the surgery," she said. "I think the surgery is just the first time it's big enough that somebody outside the four of us noticed." I asked her what she meant by that, and she said, "Kimberly's noticed it for years. She just never had a reason to say anything because it never touched anything that belonged to her directly. This time it does, because if Bradley ends up the one who controls your house and your accounts, it also changes what her own kids grow up believing is normal." That conversation with Denise on the porch is the moment I stopped thinking of the deed as an isolated bad decision Bradley had made under stress and started understanding it as a preview of exactly what would happen at Marilyn's office 2 weeks later. Except by then, I had no way of stopping it before it started. I could only make sure I got there before it finished. My surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Ridgeview Medical Center, the same hospital where Denise works, though not on the same floor as my procedure. Carol drove me in at 6 a.m. Denise met us there on her way to her own shift, still in scrubs, and told me she'd check on me the moment she had a break. Corey called the night before from 2 states away and said the same thing he always says before anything hard: "Call me the second you're out, or have someone call me." I remember almost nothing after the anesthesiologist introduced himself. The next clear memory I have is waking up in recovery, with Carol holding my hand, and Denise standing at the foot of the bed, still in her scrubs from her own shift, with her phone held out, and an expression on her face I had never once seen her wear, not at any family dinner, not at any hard conversation we'd ever had. "Dad, I need you to focus for a second," she said. "Bradley just texted the family group chat. He's at Marilyn's office right now with your healthcare power of attorney. He's telling everyone he has the authority to sit down with them today and go over how everything is going to be handled while you recover." He used those exact words, how everything is going to be handled. I want to be honest about how slowly my brain was working in that moment. I was still fighting through anesthesia fog, my hip was wrapped and aching under the blanket, and my first coherent thought wasn't anger, it was arithmetic. Bradley's healthcare power of attorney says nothing about money. Marilyn Voss knows that better than anyone alive. So either Bradley didn't understand his own authority, or Bradley was counting on nobody in that room checking. Before she called Marilyn's office, Denise did something else first, something she told me about weeks later, almost as an afterthought, though it turned out to matter. Standing in the recovery room hallway, still holding her phone, she thought about the deed itself, the one sitting in my kitchen drawer, unsigned, and a cold thought crossed her mind. What if Bradley had gone ahead anyway, using some other copy, some other signature? While I was under anesthesia and couldn't say otherwise, she called the Larkin County Recorder of Deeds office directly, gave them my full name and the property address, and asked, as calmly as she could manage, whether any new deed or transfer document had been filed against the property in the last 30 days. The clerk who answered, a woman who introduced herself only as Pam, put her on hold for 4 minutes, that Denise later described as the longest 4 minutes of her life, and came back to say no. Nothing had been filed. The property still showed under both Roger and Carol Halloway, deed unchanged since we bought the house in 1994. Denise thanked her and hung up, and only then, with that specific fear ruled out, did she call Marilyn's office to ask about the actual meeting happening at that moment. I didn't know until she told me weeks later that she'd made that call at all. When I asked her why she hadn't mentioned it sooner, she said, "Because it turned out to be nothing, Dad. But for 4 minutes, I genuinely didn't know if it was nothing, and I wasn't going to wait to find out after visiting hours." Only after that did Denise call Marilyn's office from the hallway outside recovery, using the number saved from my last visit. She got Renata Suarez on the phone and asked her one direct question. Does a healthcare power of attorney give someone authority to discuss estate division? Renata told her, carefully but clearly, that it does not, and that Marilyn had already told Bradley the same thing when he arrived, but that Bradley had insisted the family still meet, informally, just to talk things through, since everyone's already here, and that Denise, Corey, and Kimberly, Bradley's wife, had in fact driven over that morning at Bradley's request, believing this was a legitimate part of handling my recovery. That last detail is the one that told me how far Bradley had actually gone. He hadn't just misunderstood a document alone in a room. He had convinced his own wife and 2 siblings to show up to a real meeting in a real office on the morning of my surgery, based on an authority he did not have. Here is where I need to tell you about Renata Suarez's role in this story, because without her, everything that happened next would have unfolded very differently. Renata had pulled my file that morning when Bradley called to confirm the meeting, standard practice before any appointment involving an existing client. While she had the file open, she noticed something that didn't add up. A note in her own bound appointment register, in her own handwriting, from 19 days earlier, showing that I had called personally to schedule the will update, described in the register as personal request. Bradley's version of events, which he'd repeated twice already that morning, first to Marilyn and then to his own siblings in the waiting room, was that I had asked him, before the surgery, to just handle things with Marilyn if anything happened to me, because I trusted him to manage it without bothering anyone. Renata told me later exactly what went through her mind reading that register entry. If Mr. Halloway asked his son to handle everything, why did Mr. Halloway call this office himself 3 weeks ago to schedule his own will update, in his own name, using his own voice on the phone? Those 2 stories can't both be true. She mentioned it to Marilyn quietly in the hallway outside her office before the meeting Bradley was pushing for even started. Marilyn didn't say anything to Bradley yet. She's too careful a lawyer to accuse a client's son of anything without more than a scheduling entry. But she did tell Bradley that before any conversation about the estate could happen, everyone would need to wait for her to review the file completely. And she asked Renata to pull every document connected to my name, including the will I'd signed 19 days earlier, which Bradley did not know existed. If you want more stories about quiet people who keep better records than the people trying to take advantage of them, subscribing is the easiest way to catch the next one, because there's always another family finding out the hard way that patience with paperwork outlasts patience with people. Back in the recovery room, Denise made a decision that I am still, months later, deeply grateful for. And it's the kind of decision that only made sense because of exactly who she is. She checked my chart, my vitals, and Dr. Okonkwo's own discharge notes, and she saw what she already suspected. I was a healthy 67-year-old man who'd had a routine, well-tolerated hip replacement with no complications, stable vitals, and a surgeon whose standard practice for cases exactly like mine was a possible same-day discharge if pain was managed, and I could complete basic mobility milestones with physical therapy before evening. Bradley had built his entire morning around an assumption that I would be unreachable, groggy, and out of commission for at least a day or 2, giving him a clean window to have his conversation and present its outcome to me later as something already mostly settled. He had built that assumption the same way he'd built the transfer on death deed, on what he expected to be true, rather than on anything he'd actually confirmed. Denise found Dr. Okonkwo between his morning rounds and told him honestly that there was a serious family matter unfolding at a lawyer's office across town involving my finances, that I was alert, coherent, and asking clear questions, and that if there was any clinical path to accelerating the standard mobility checks safely, it mattered to our family more than usual that we not waste the day. Dr. Okonkwo, to his credit, didn't need much convincing. He examined me himself, walked me the length of the hallway with a walker while Denise timed it on her phone, checked my pain level and my incision, and signed off on a same-day discharge 4 hours after I'd been wheeled out of the operating room, with strict instructions about ice, elevation, and a follow-up in 10 days. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters for how you understand the rest of this story. Nobody rushed my medical care to win an argument. Dr. Okonkwo would not have discharged me if it hadn't been medically appropriate, and Denise would never have asked him to. What actually happened was smaller and more honest than that. The truth about my recovery, which was that I was doing fine, happened to arrive at exactly the moment Bradley needed everyone to believe I wasn't doing fine at all. Carol drove. Denise sat in the back seat with me, my walker folded across her lap, giving me water and checking my incision dressing every few minutes the whole way there, because some habits don't turn off just because you clock out of a shift. I remember very little about the ride, except one useless thought circling through my head, the same thought I used to have driving to a hearing about a contested inspection. I have the paperwork. I just need to get to the room. About 10 minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed on the seat beside me, and Denise picked it up and read it out loud because my hands were too unsteady to focus on the screen. It was a text from Corey, sent to me directly rather than the family group chat, time-stamped 11 minutes earlier. Dad, if you can read this, please don't sign anything. I don't fully understand what's happening, but something feels off, and I want you here before anyone decides anything. I want you to notice the time on that message. Corey sent it before Renata found the register entry, before Kimberly said a word at the table, before anyone had confronted Bradley with anything. He'd been sitting in that conference room getting increasingly uneasy on his own, watching his older brother talk in circles, and he'd stepped into the hallway to send it without telling anyone in the room he'd done it. Carol read the road. Denise read the message twice, and I remember thinking, even through the fog of the pain medication, that whatever else happened in that office in the next 20 minutes, at least 2 of my 3 children had already, independently, decided something was wrong before I ever rolled through that door myself. We arrived at Marilyn Voss's office 2 hours and 11 minutes after Bradley's first message to the family group chat. I was in a wheelchair Denise had insisted on renting from the hospital's supply room rather than let me try the walker across a parking lot. And I want you to picture exactly what that looked like from the other side of the conference room door. Bradley, Kimberly, Corey, and an empty chair meant for Denise, all sitting around Marilyn's conference table, in the middle of a conversation Bradley had spent 5 years building toward, when the door opened and I rolled in myself, 4 hours out of surgery, with my daughter behind me holding a folder of my own. Bradley's face did the thing I'd seen it do once before, in my kitchen, over the deed. It tightened, fast, before he could stop it. "Dad, you shouldn't be out of the hospital," he said. And I want you to notice that this was his first sentence. Not, "Are you okay?" and not, "How did surgery go?" His first sentence was about the fact that I was there at all. "The surgeon disagreed with you," I said. "So did the recovery." I didn't raise my voice. I want that understood clearly, because I know how these stories are usually told, and mine doesn't go that way. Marilyn had already told me, in a brief phone call from the hospital hallway before we left, that the single most useful thing I could do was let Bradley finish saying whatever he intended to say, in full, before anyone corrected him, because a half-interrupted claim can be argued with later, but a fully spoken one has nowhere left to hide. So I let him talk. Bradley explained to Marilyn, to Corey, to Kimberly, and now to me, that he had my full trust, that I had told him privately, weeks earlier, to just take care of things if anything happened during the surgery. That he wasn't trying to cut anyone out, only trying to spare the family the stress of a complicated conversation while I recovered. When he finished, Marilyn opened the folder in front of her and set 2 documents side by side on the table, in clear view of everyone in the room. The first was my healthcare power of attorney from 8 years ago, the one Bradley had walked in with that morning. The second was the will I had signed 19 days earlier. "Bradley," Marilyn said, "I want to make sure everyone in this room understands exactly what each of these documents does, because I don't think that's been clear to anyone but Roger and me until right now." She read the healthcare power of attorney's actual language aloud, the section limiting its authority strictly to medical decisions in the event of incapacity. And then she read the date and the notarization line on the new will, dated 19 days before that morning, naming all 3 children equally and naming Denise as financial decision-maker in the event of incapacity. Corey spoke first, and it was the plainest sentence anyone said in that whole room. "Bradley, if Dad already updated his will 3 weeks ago, why did you tell us this morning that he asked you to handle it alone?" Bradley didn't answer that right away. He looked at Marilyn, then at me, then at the 2 documents side by side on the table, and I watched him do the same arithmetic I'd done in the recovery room, except 4 hours slower and in front of everyone he loved. Renata, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table taking notes, said the thing that closed the door on the version of events Bradley had been building all morning. "Mr. Halloway called this office himself 19 days ago to schedule the will update. I wrote the appointment in our register in his own name, from his own call. I still have it." I want to describe the silence that followed, because it lasted longer than any silence I've experienced in my family, and it wasn't comfortable for anyone, including me. Kimberly, Bradley's wife, put her hand flat on the table, not on Bradley's arm, and said quietly, "You told me Dad asked you to do this. You said it twice this morning, in the car." Bradley looked at his own wife for a long moment before he answered her, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost the confident register it carried into every room he'd ever walked into in his adult life. I thought if I could just get everyone in the same room and get ahead of it, before anything actually happened to Dad, it would be easier than if we all found out the hard way, later, that nobody had a plan, he said. I didn't think Dad was going to be fine so fast. I thought I had more time. That sentence, "I thought I had more time," is the closest thing to an honest confession Bradley gave that day, and I've turned it over more since then than almost anything else anyone said. It wasn't greed exactly, and it wasn't cruelty. It was fear dressed up as competence, the same fear Carol had named for me 2 weeks earlier at our own kitchen table, except now it was sitting in a conference room with nowhere left to hide behind. I didn't yell at my son. I want to be honest that some part of me wanted to. Sitting there in a wheelchair 4 hours out of surgery, with a wave of nausea rising that had nothing to do with the anesthesia, but I'd promised myself the night before the surgery, lying awake next to Carol, that if anything like this ever actually happened, I would be the calmest person in whatever room it happened in, because the facts didn't need my anger to be true. They only needed to be said in order, with the paper to back them up. "Bradley," I said, "you didn't have a plan to get ahead of anything. You had a plan to be the only one in the room when the plan got decided. Those aren't the same thing. And I think you know that, or you wouldn't have told 2 different stories to 2 different people this morning." He didn't argue with that. He looked at the table for a long time, and then he said, "The thing I think mattered most, though it took him another 2 weeks to fully mean it. I don't know how to just wait and see if you're okay, Dad. I never have. I'd rather have a plan for the worst thing than sit with not knowing." Denise, sitting beside me, said the thing that I think finally cracked something open in that room. "Bradley, you could have called me. You could have called Corey. You could have called Dad's own doctor and asked what the actual recovery looked like, instead of deciding what it looked like on your own and building a whole morning around it. That's not planning. That's just deciding you already know and hoping the rest of us catch up. Corey, who had spent the whole morning quiet, finally added the last piece. Bradley, I told Denise to give you the benefit of the doubt when she called me about the deed. I did that again this morning, right up until Renata opened that register. I'm not going to do that a third time. Not about this. We didn't finish the conversation in Marilyn's conference room that day. I was in real pain by then, past the point where sitting upright in a wheelchair was doing me any good. And Marilyn, sensible as always, suggested we table the rest of it for a follow-up meeting, once I'd actually had a few days to recover properly. Corey drove me and Carol home himself, insisting on it, while Denise stayed behind for another 20 minutes with Bradley and Kimberly. Denise told me what was actually said in those 20 minutes, about a month later. Once enough time had passed, that it stopped feeling like reopening a wound and started feeling like closing one. She said she waited until Kimberly stepped out to the restroom, and then she said to Bradley, plainly, I need you to know that if you had gotten to Dad before Renata found that register, I don't think you would have stopped at one meeting. I think you'd have kept building on it, the same way you built on the tax bill and the checking account and the insurance renewals, until one day none of us would have had a real vote in anything, and you'd have believed the whole time you were just the one who handles things. Bradley didn't deny it. She told me he sat with his hands flat on the table for a long moment before he answered her, and when he did, he said, I think you're right, and I think that's the part that scares me most about today. Not getting caught. Realizing I might have actually believed my own version of it by the time I told it to Dad's face. Denise told him one more thing before Kimberly came back. I'm not going to hold this over you forever, Bradley, but I need you to earn back the version of trust where nobody has to double-check you. That's going to take longer than one apology, and it should. I think that conversation, more than anything said in front of me at Marilyn's table, is the reason Bradley called me 4 days later, asking to come by the house alone. Denise never told me to expect that call. She just told him the truth in a room without me in it. The way I'd once told my own children the truth about the will at a dinner table years before any of them thought to ask for it in writing. If you've ever watched one person in your family slowly become the one who handles everything, without anyone ever actually voting on it, tell me in the comments at what point you would have asked to see the paperwork for yourself. We had the real follow-up meeting at Marilyn's office 12 days after the surgery, once I was steady enough on my new hip to sit through an hour without wincing every few minutes. All 3 of my children were there, Kimberly included, at her own request, because she'd told Denise privately in the days before that she didn't want to be the last person in the family to hear things secondhand ever again. Bradley had called me himself 4 days after the surgery, before that follow-up meeting was even scheduled, and asked if he could come by the house alone. No folder, no agenda, just the 2 of us. I said yes, mostly because Carol thought it mattered that I hear him out without an audience, and she was right. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where he'd once left the transfer on death deed, and he said something I hadn't expected. I've been trying to remember when I decided I was the one who handles things, and I can't actually point to a day. I think it just became true because nobody stopped me, and every time nobody stopped me, I believed it a little more. I told him I understood that better than he probably realized, because I'd spent 34 years watching contractors talk themselves into believing a shortcut was fine, simply because nobody caught it the first 6 times they took it. The 7th time isn't the problem, Bradley, I said. The 7th time is just the first time somebody finally checked. He nodded, and he didn't argue, and he asked me what it would take to fix it properly, which is how we ended up back in Marilyn's office 12 days after the surgery, with all 3 of my children in the same room at the same time, for the first time in longer than I could remember. Marilyn walked through the will page by page in plain language, confirmed that the house and every account would be divided equally among Bradley, Denise, and Corey, and formalized something new at my request: a financial power of attorney naming all three of my children jointly, rather than any one of them individually, with a requirement that any transaction above a modest threshold required documented agreement from at least two of the three. Not because I distrust Bradley completely, because I'd learned at real cost what happens when one person is allowed to become the only interpreter of a family's finances, however good his intentions started out being. Marilyn also did something practical that I hadn't thought to ask for, which is exactly why I pay her to think of things I don't. She had Renata draw up a one-page written summary in plain language of exactly what each existing document covered. The healthcare power of attorney, limited strictly to medical decisions. The new financial power of attorney, requiring 2 of 3 signatures above $5,000, and the will itself dividing the estate equally. She made 3 copies, one for each of my children, and she said, handing them across the table, "I want each of you to have this in writing, in your own hands, so that 6 months from now, if anyone remembers a conversation differently, there's a page that doesn't change depending on who's remembering it." Denise asked one question before they signed anything. What happens if 2 of us agree on something and the third doesn't? Does it just get blocked forever? Marilyn had already thought about that too. No. If there's a genuine disagreement above the threshold, it goes to me first, as a neutral party, before it goes anywhere else. I'm not going to make the decision for you. I'm going to make sure whatever decision gets made with everyone actually in the room, which is the entire thing that went wrong 3 weeks ago. Bradley didn't fight the joint structure. I think some part of him was relieved by it. The way a man is relieved to put down a bag he's been carrying so long, he forgot how heavy it had gotten. He asked one question during that meeting, and it's the one I think about most when I consider whether any of this actually changed him. "Does this mean you don't trust me anymore?" I told him the honest answer, which is harder than either yes or no. "It means I trust all 3 of you exactly the same amount now, which is more than I can say for how things were set up before. That's not a punishment, Bradley. That's just what happens when 3 kids on the same team ought to have the same view of the field." Corey spoke up near the end of that meeting, and it's the moment I keep returning to when I think about how this actually ended. Better than the confrontation itself. I wanted on record that I should have called Dad directly the second Denise told me about the deed, instead of trying to talk her down first. I chose staying comfortable over checking a fact, and it almost let something happen I would have regretted for the rest of my life. I didn't ask Corey to say that. I don't think anyone did. He'd clearly been sitting with it since the day of the surgery, waiting for the right room to say it in. Marilyn ended the meeting the way she ends most of hers, without ceremony, just closing the folder and saying, "I'll have the final documents ready for signature by the end of the week." And for the first time in 5 years, nobody in that room needed to wonder what anybody else had already decided without them. I have one more thing to tell you, and it's the smallest detail in this whole story, but it's the one that actually made the whole thing feel finished to me. More than the meeting, more than Bradley's apology, more than the new financial power of attorney. About 6 weeks after the surgery, once I was walking without the cane, Carol found me in my home office one evening, organizing the fireproof box where I keep every document about our life. I'd bought a new expandable folder, the kind with color-coded tabs, and I was splitting everything into 2 sections for the first time in my life. A red tab for healthcare documents and a blue tab for financial documents, physically separated in a way they had never been before, so that no single piece of paper in that box could ever again be mistaken, by accident or on purpose. For a piece of paper, it wasn't. Clipped to the inside of the blue tab, I put the small appointment card Renata Suarez had handwritten and given me the day I signed my new will, 19 days before my surgery. The one with the date, the time, and her initials confirming I'd scheduled it myself. I didn't frame it. I didn't need to make a display out of it. I just wanted it exactly where the next person who ever opened that folder, whether that's one of my children or a stranger settling my estate 40 years from now, would see the proof in my own handwriting request and Renata's own log of who actually asked for what and when, before anyone else got the chance to decide for me. Carol asked me why that particular little card mattered so much to me out of everything in that box. I told her the truth, because it's the one piece of paper in this whole mess that nobody wrote for me. I wrote it myself, by making a phone call nobody else knew about, 3 weeks before I needed it. 34 years of inspecting other people's houses, and it turns out the only inspection that ever really mattered was the one I did on my own life, before anybody else got a vote. She kissed the top of my head, the way she has for 44 years, and left me to finish sorting the folder alone. Bradley came by 2 weeks after that, on a Saturday, to help me move a bookshelf in the office, and he noticed the folder sitting open on the desk, the red tab and the blue tab both visible. He didn't say anything about it right away. He picked up the appointment card, read it, and set it back down exactly where he'd found it. Careful. The way a man handles something he understands, he doesn't have the standing to comment on anymore. I keep thinking I should frame something too, he said finally. Not to prove anything to you and Mom, just so my own kids grow up seeing where a decision actually came from, instead of just hearing whatever version gets repeated enough times to sound true. I told him that sounded like the right instinct, finally pointed in the right direction. He asked if I'd help him set up something similar for his own family's paperwork, the same red and blue system. And I said yes, because teaching someone to keep an honest ledger has always been easier for me than staying angry at him for not having one in the first place. That bookshelf still sits a little crooked in the corner of my office, because Bradley and I got to talking instead of finishing the job properly. And every time I look at it, I think less about the morning he sat in Marilyn's conference room with the wrong document, and more about the Saturday afternoon he stood in front of the right one, reading it carefully and finally understanding the difference. Some habits you build for other people to see. This one I built so that on the one day it mattered most, I wouldn't need to be in the room to be believed.